Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the World IA Speaker Series. We, in fact, took a break for a couple of weeks. Now we are back. And thank you for joining in today. We have an excellent webinar for you, and I'm sure you will immensely enjoy it. My name is Rupa Mishra. I'm an associate professor here at Rutgers University. I manage and teach in the user experience design and product design concentrations in the MBS program. I'm also an active member of World IA Association. The topic for today's webinar is Microsoft Learn's Knowledge Graph. The speaker for this interactive event is Dana Bublitz. Did I say your last name correctly?
Bublitz, but no one ever gets it right, so it's totally fine.
Dana has been helping businesses of all sizes tackle the content and information problems for over a decade. She has focused primarily on developing structures and systems for large-scale content organization and retrieval that meet both business needs and user goals. As a senior information architect at Microsoft, she heads up the Microsoft Learned Knowledge Graph program, focused on enabling better user experiences through well-connected and structured content. This is an excellent topic. And let me share Dana's LinkedIn profile link in the chat.
Thank you.
So knowledge graphs can provide significant support in content findability and discoverability for large content ecosystems. After introducing the Microsoft Learned Knowledge Graph program, she will discuss the information architecture work needed to support such a knowledge graph and how to gain buy-in from business stakeholders. I'm sure this will be a very interesting topic today. So if some of you have joined before, this is something I shared all the time, that we'll be recording all the speakers in this World IA Cafe speaker series, and the videos will be available on World IA's website. Let me put the website link in the chat. And it is a great organization. It is great to meet and network with people from all over the world. And if you're interested, I would strongly suggest to join the organization. Every year we host the World IA Day, and this has been going on since 2012. And the next one is in March. So it's not really, it's just a few weeks away. The format of the Cafe Speaker Series is this, around about 45 to 50 minutes. Is the talk followed by 10 15 minutes Q&A. So please don't hesitate to ask as many questions as you like. And Dana, if you like to change the format, that's up to you. That's fine.
No, that sounds great.
The other thing I would like to mention, it is very important in today's world, well, it's always been, to network and meet people and to connect with people. So as Nihar had mentioned before, if you like, you can share your LinkedIn profile link in the chat. And I think it is a good thing. So let me put my LinkedIn profile link in the chat. Okay. So if you are interested about my department's programs, that is Rutgers MBS program, we offer product design and user experience design. I believe Nihar has put the link, so you can reach out to me and I'll be very happy to answer your questions. So enjoy the webinar today, and over to you, Dana.
Thank you so much. And apologies again that my video is not working, but at least you'll be able to see my slides. So thanks everyone for coming out today. I saw some familiar names in the chat, so happy to see some returning faces and meet some new folks. as you mentioned, I'm here today to talk about the Knowledge Graph program that I've been heading up for Microsoft Learn. And with that, I will just dive in. So I want to talk about kind of three main areas today. So first, kind of the domain of what Microsoft Learn is, and then kind of our content, what we cover. And I think both talking about the domain and our content will probably give you a good idea about why we're building a knowledge graph, but I'll be a little bit more specific about the why as well. But then I'll kind of talk about kind of the knowledge graph program as well. So how we're actually going about building this thing. As you'll kind of probably get a sense for as I talk through the domain and the scope of our content, you'll probably get to see pretty quickly that we are building a lot of things from scratch. We don't have a lot of capabilities to just kind of bring in the ready-built software because we're Microsoft and we like to do things in-house a lot of the time, which presents some interesting challenges when we're thinking about things like taxonomies and knowledge graphs and content retrieval. So with that, I'm going to dive into kind of the domain of Microsoft. Get this. There we go. So the domain of Microsoft Learn. What is actually Microsoft Learn? What do we care about? What kind of topics or subjects do we cover? And to kind of give a sense of that, I'll talk a little bit or give you kind of an overview of what Microsoft's mission is, as well as Microsoft Learn's mission. So Microsoft's mission, all up, is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. Pretty small task, nothing overwhelming about that at all. And then Microsoft Learn specifically is designed to help you get the most value from Microsoft products and services so that you can make the most impact through the work that you want to do. Whether you're innovating or troubleshooting a problem, technology and the skills you need to use it are now within reach. So Microsoft Learn really focuses as the learning space for anybody who is working with Microsoft products outside of maybe the consumer space. We don't do consumer support, but if you are learning how to spin up an Azure instance and learn to work with our AI tools, we have training and documentation around that. If you are looking to become Microsoft certified, we house that information and content as well. So pretty much if you are trying to learn how to use our products, we are the place that you go. And our content is immense. So not only do we house kind of traditional technical documentation, we also contain technical architectures, our best practices for how our products and services actually integrate to solve real world problems. We have training and certifications. So if you want to learn how to use Power BI or Azure, you can learn how to do that on our site. And then you can also show to potential employers that you have a Microsoft certificate in this. We have validated that you have these skills. We also have a community Q&A form where people can post their questions or problems using our products, very much like Stack Overflow, and then get community or Microsoft expert answers to how to solve those problems. We also include code samples. So if you want to learn or see kind of what the code looks like for using something like Azure Text Analytics, we have a sample of how that works so you could actually see it in action. And we also house content for events and shows. So Microsoft has a few very large developer-focused events that happen each year. And often those are where new products are launched, new kind of innovative areas that we are looking into really get talked about. And then these are also talked about in kind of the shows, the video formats that we also house. So we have tons of content. And these don't even represent all of the specific content types on our platform. Any one of these areas could be an entire website in and of itself, but we get the special pleasure of having them all on the same platform. And so to kind of give a little context about what Microsoft Docs was and how it's grown to be Microsoft Learn, I wanted to give a little bit of a timeline just to kind of add to the complexity of this. So Microsoft Docs originally was launched in about 2015, and it was really just a new documentation hosting platform that hosted product documentation for a few big products like Azure, Windows.net, not everything though. At that point, technical documentation was still kind of managed and housed on individual product sites. There was no central place to find documentation for all of Microsoft. But by about 2018, we were really solidified as the primary platform for hosting that documentation. So we had lots of content to kind of migrate onto our site from other parts of the organization. At the same time, in about 2018, 2019, the original Microsoft Learn, which is now our training content section, launched with structured, interactive, asynchronous training content. So those are all kind of the modules and the learning paths that teach people in kind of a digital asynchronous way how to use our products, and was really kind of the first time that we had really properly structured content on the site. And then in fall of 2022, after we continued to kind of expand organically and kind of became a bigger name within the organization, we officially rebranded everything to Microsoft Learn, because it was no longer just about the documentation. It was about learning how to use the products, learning how to integrate them, and using the documentation to support those learning journeys. And this is the front page, the landing page of our website today, Microsoft or learn.microsoft.com. And just to kind of give you an idea of some of the things that we care about. So you can see in kind of that top level navigation, we have kind of our big modality areas: documentation, training, certifications. And then you can also see, like, we are really focusing on getting our users, getting our customers to learn how to use our products by doing, not just reading documentation, because documentation is one way to learn how to use a product or kind of how to troubleshoot a problem. But there's a lot to be said for hands-on training. And kind of in this new kind of digital space, there are so many opportunities to really personalize that training to someone's unique needs, with kind of our entire product suite. It's a really amazing area to kind of see grow. But we also want people to kind of brag about what they're learning on our site, because not only does that, I think, bring more people and have them see some value in what we are offering, but it also, it gives us a little pat on the back and lets us know that we're doing a good job by actually getting people skills that they want to brag about or that they want to showcase on their resumes. And so that kind of gives you a very brief view at kind of the scale of our site. It is very immense. I'll talk a little bit more about scale here in a second, but we have lots of different content modalities. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, lots and lots of products. If we are now the home for kind of Microsoft product documentation and training all up, that's a lot of products to cover. And so scale is something we think about all the time on the IA team. Last count, and this is probably closer to 4 million pieces by now, but the last time I counted, there was about 3.5 million pieces of English US-based content alone. This doesn't include translated content, whether that is human or machine translated. It doesn't include localized content. So just 3.5 million pieces of content for English in the US alone. And that just continues to get exponentially larger the kind of larger view you take of it. We have over 4,000 people who have contributed to the content on Microsoft Learn, whether that is contributions to documentation, whether that is writing training content, creating certification paths. We have a lot of people who write content and create content for this platform. And all of that content is stored in about 450, if not more, GitHub repos. We don't have a traditional CMS that houses our content. Instead, it all pretty much lives in Markdown files in a GitHub repo. And that leads me to our technical stack, which is always a fun challenge. So because we are Microsoft, it is homegrown. We don't use a lot of third-party products on our stack, which makes kind of the scope of what we're able to do at any one given point kind of a toss-up, because either someone's already created that functionality, or we have to get engineering to actually scope it and create it from scratch most of the time. Because of this, we do have kind of a headless CMS setup where, again, we don't have a traditional content repo. We don't have a single CMS that manages where all that content lives or how it all connects together. It is really kind of the GitHub repos and then all of the technical stack that lives on top of that renders it to the UI, or creates the recommendations or anything that we need to do with that content. And it can get really complex. Partially because, we have organically grown over the past 8 years or so. And so, someone hacked together something that worked really well in 2018, but does not work in 2024. And so we have to deal with kind of that complexity, that technical debt, on a large scale, kind of, and on a daily basis. Governance is also a big challenge for us. Up until very recently, we did not have any ability to bulk tag, which for a website of our scale is absolutely essential. When I first joined in 2019, I was asking about kind of the taxonomy setup and how things were running and how, you might do retagging. And I think the person I was talking to just kind of laughed and smiled and said, we don't retag content. Or like, we do not, put out new taxonomies because we have no way to tag what already exists unless you ask like all the content teams to go back and manually apply those taxonomy tags or that metadata. And so bulk tagging up until very recently was a very, very big hurdle. We also had a lot of technical limitations in terms of like what our taxonomies and what our metadata could actually do. A great example of this is our product taxonomy, which again, Microsoft is huge. We have hundreds and hundreds of products. But because of the way that the view was created or kind of coded into the actual website, we could only have 2 levels of hierarchy, which for a company as complex and huge as Microsoft is very, very limiting. When you are trying to house, 500-600 product terms into 2 levels, it gets really, really hairy really fast. And similarly, our tagging infrastructure just has not historically been very great. We have had to rely on authors, all those, hundreds, thousands of people who contributed to content. They have to know how to write manually the right tags, the right slugs into their content so that the right metadata is applied. And this is obviously very problematic because it requires everyone to know like how our metadata is used, how it's structured, how to make new requests, how to get things changed, not to mention things like misspellings or typos or anything else that goes wrong when you have thousands of people trying to input metadata. It becomes really messy really quick. And then kind of also on the people front, getting alignment across an organization as big as Microsoft Learn or Microsoft as a whole is just incredibly difficult. I think this is probably the bulk of what we spend our time doing some days is just trying to get an answer to the question, what even is a product? Is a product just something that has a SKU? Is it something that we only sell for money? Or are the things that we also offer for free, free resources, are those considered products? And if any of you remember some of the antitrust lawsuits in the 90s, it's actually really legally important for us to define what a product is. But it's not always an easy conversation to have. And then we also get asked about, what about marketing categories? Every product suite, whether it's Azure or M365 or Windows, they have their own way of marketing their own products. And so we always get asked like, oh, well, can't we just use Azure's marketing categories to organize our content? And the answer is often, well, no, because that is Azure's way. We have to worry about Azure. We have to worry about Windows, Xbox, Microsoft, Entra, all of these different products that don't necessarily fit into those specific marketing categories, which is also, often our answer to the question, well, why don't we just map to this taxonomy over in this part of the organization? Or why don't we use this team's product taxonomy? And a lot of times it's because, well, it doesn't fit our content. It doesn't fit our site's needs. And so we have to think a lot about, how to have those conversations where it's like, we can't actually use that, but let's figure out what information we can take. And especially on the alignment front, I was talking with our taxonomist one day who actually has worked for governmental organizations. And she told me, I hate to say it, but I think this is worse than working for the government. Trying to get alignment across as many product teams and authors as we have is just really difficult some days. But it's an essential part of the job and an essential part of building a knowledge graph that works for everyone. Because we can't take our own view of the truth. We have to make sure that our view of the truth, what the knowledge graph represents, actually works for everyone else as well. And so when we start to think about kind of the different ways people actually access our content, that becomes even more complex because there is no one path through our site or through our content. You might come in through documentation. You might come in through some training. You might be looking for a very specific product. Or maybe you're a student and you are being served with how to code something aligned with Space Jam, a movie that came out a few years ago. So once you start kind of looking at our content in this way and figuring out the paths that people take to get through it, it becomes even more complex. And a single, taxonomy or set of taxonomies does not do the complexity justice, especially once we start to think about cross-product content, because our products integrate. That is really part of our corporate product strategy, is the idea that we have seamless product integrations. But when you are limited to a two-level hierarchy of products, that doesn't really show the complexity of how that all works together, especially if you're trying to make your way through this massive content. And so having a broad ontology that only covers the classes also doesn't kind of get to the specifics of what our users need, which is why we've really started looking at kind of a knowledge graph to make all of this complexity a little bit more usable and understandable. Because similarly to the complexity of our domain, of our organization as a whole, our users are also really complex. Often in previous projects I've worked on, when you're designing a taxonomy or a set of taxonomies or just, information structures for a business, usually you have an idea of, 2 or 3, maybe 4 types of users that are going to use this. And so you have a point of view that you can construct those taxonomies or that ontology around. When your users are everyone, except for your mom who's just looking for help on how to write an email in Outlook, she's got to find help elsewhere. But when it's everyone else who is using our products, we don't have that ability to say, we are going to take the educator view of Microsoft products, and that's how we're going to organize everything. We have to organize everything for the educator who is using Microsoft products in their classroom. We have to use it for the engineer who is, watching the server room and making sure that everything's working correctly. And we also have to structure things so that your CTO or your CEO can find the information they need to make really big technical decisions for an organization or a business. So those are very different viewpoints, and we have to be able to accommodate them all and many more. And so when we're thinking about actually designing a knowledge graph for this, especially since, as I said, we kind of do things from the ground up where we are, it's not as easy as just saying, oh, well, we know we have all of these different concepts and these are how they're put together, let's implement it. A lot of what we have been doing around building the knowledge graph is foundational. It is getting our taxonomies aligned. It is getting governance in line. It is making sure that we are tagging things appropriately and in the same kind of logical way, so that we're not, tagging wildly different using the same terms. It's a really foundational work that starts to kind of seep into every part of the organization once it's there. And so why a knowledge graph? Really explicitly, you can only do so much with taxonomies, which is what a lot of sites run on. So if I was on Microsoft Learn and we were only using taxonomies to do content discovery, content retrieval, we would be pretty limited. I could get you from an article about Microsoft Azure to another article about Azure, or maybe a certification about Azure, or maybe some training about Azure. But I couldn't get you to anything that is related but maybe tagged slightly differently, or about a different product in the same industry. Using ontology, or an applied ontology in the sense that, an applied ontology is a knowledge graph, we can do a lot more relating and a lot more for user discoverability, even just through inferences. So not only are we able to say like, oh, you're reading an article about the use of Microsoft Azure in the healthcare industry. Cool, I've got some training about another product, but it uses the same programming language. Maybe you're interested in that. Or I've got a certification about how to become an IT admin for the healthcare industry. Cool, I can send you to that certification. And so having an ontology or a knowledge graph to really make those content connections becomes a lot more powerful for finding people the right content in the right context. And so what does a knowledge graph even do for us, outside of just, content discoverability? For my team, the IA team, and kind of our content partners, it's being able to integrate diverse data. When we get the question, well, why don't you just map to, this organization's product taxonomy? We can say, okay, we can do that. We still have our own, but there is information that might be useful in that other taxonomy. And so we can map that. We can integrate that into the knowledge graph. We can automate term discovery. This is a big thing for our team right now because we have to rely on authors to tell us when something has been rebranded, when a new product is coming out, maybe when something has changed brand families. And usually they tell us at the last minute, right before they need to publish content, right before the big conference, right before the launch. And so being able to have that information before they need it would be a big help because it allows us to, not scramble so much trying to validate, like, is this something we should have? Do we actually need to house this? Is this, something that is valuable to the entire platform? So being able to automate that term discovery would be a big help for us. A knowledge graph also provides greater ability to do governance on our taxonomies and on our content. Right now, being able to actually find the right type of content for the right context and seeing if there's a gap is really, really difficult. So being able to actually see oh, do we have enough content about security within Microsoft Azure? I don't know. Let's query the knowledge graph and see what comes up. As well as content reuse. I think this is the biggest thing that I see being beneficial from a KG knowledge graph point of view for internal teams. Because we often, with so many people writing content for our site, we so often run into the problem where Team A is writing, a piece of content about, Microsoft Azure and Windows, and then Team B on the other side of the fence is writing about Windows and Azure, but they don't talk to each other, and they might be writing duplicate content, but they don't know that exists. And so being able to reuse content not only saves us money because we're not, having multiple people write the same stuff, it also improves SEO because the robots do not like seeing the same content on the same domain. And it also just makes it easier for our customers to trust us. Because if you're coming into a documentation site and you see two articles that are written slightly differently, but they're about the same thing, then you start to wonder, okay, why is this the same information? Who's writing this? Who's actually managing this? It doesn't invoke a lot of trust when people are finding the same information, but slightly different and from different perspectives on the same site. For our users, a knowledge graph really, really improves content discoverability and findability. When you have a platform or a site as big as ours, it's just impossible to expect someone to dig through everything to find what they want. Whether that's through, pure navigation or even things like recommendations and personalization. It's really hard to do with just kind of a strict taxonomy. We can better show how our products integrate and are used. Since this is such a core part of our corporate product strategy, it's really important to show people how that actually works, especially at the documentation level, where that is where they are trying to figure out, okay, how do these things actually work together? And it also provides consistency. When people can see from us, Microsoft, the source of truth about our products, how things integrate, how things work, it instills a lot more trust and a lot more kind of just better feelings towards, using our products. And that's not to say that there aren't other graphs or knowledge graphs at Microsoft. Bing absolutely has a knowledge graph that underpins its search engine. We even have an academic graph that was spun up many years ago to kind of describe the academic research space. And we also have a product, a set of APIs called Microsoft Graph that interacts between all of your instances of M365 or Excel or Office or Teams. That's how Microsoft makes sure that you have the same information in different products. And so these exist. We're not reinventing the wheel, but these don't describe our domain. And so for us to be able to interact with these or to integrate with any of these other graphs, we have to have something that actually describes our content, our platform, and what we care about. And so where we started was, as I've kind of mentioned, really starting from scratch. When I joined, the taxonomy management process was basically non-existent. The process was really, someone would send me a request for a new term. I'd look into it to see if it made sense. If it did, I would add that term to a spreadsheet. And then I would add that term to a markdown file. And then somewhere, usually in Shanghai, an engineer would pick up that markdown file and then manually add that new taxonomy term to every system that required it. This is not a way to do taxonomy management or IA at scale. It was incredibly costly, incredibly time consuming, and there was no way that we could ever really delete a term. It was just more or less impossible. And so a really, really bad way to do taxonomy management, and no way you can even consider doing a knowledge graph with this type of workflow. It's just way too complex. So difficult to actually use our taxonomies, use our metadata. We didn't have much technical support because engineering teams were focused on, other kind of shinier things. Our content was really a black box. I think one of the biggest examples that kind of stuck with me from when I first started was there was a leadership team or someone on a leadership team who was looking for kind of an audit of all of the security content we had on Microsoft Docs at the time. And I think I heard it took someone or a team 3 months, a ridiculously long time, to actually audit all of the security content we had on our site, because nobody could actually just say like, oh, let's find all the content that is tagged with security or whatever, relevant terms that might apply there. You had to manually go in and find all of the pieces of content. So impossible to actually see what's there when you have that much content and no metadata to actually grab it. Across our platform, metadata needs were totally misaligned. Requirements were all over the place. We had 2 product taxonomies that were used on different content, so there was no way that we were going to get that to work together. No checks and balances for how new content fit into the platform, and especially on a platform that was kind of growing organically and migrating new content sets in all the time. This became really problematic because then you're just kind of shoving things into a closet and hoping that they're going to make sense, or that you're going to be able to find something at some point, and that does not work out. And because of that, our content was really siloed. Our documentation and our training content had no crosswalks between them, and so if you were on a documentation page for Azure Active Directory, there was no way to know that there was training content about the same product that maybe would have solved, a user's problems or given them more context or given them, more information about what they needed to know about that product. There's just no way to make those crosswalks. And I think what has really changed kind of our ability, our capabilities, and some of the buy-in from our business leaders was really starting to model this out. So one of the big efforts that was really underway when I joined was just creating a unified content model. I think at the time we had about 60, maybe even more disparate content types, and they were all just kind of amorphous blobs. There wasn't a lot of structure there. And so it was basically like, okay, you get a title and a description, and there might be some fields for metadata, but after that, it's all just body copy, body text, nothing else there to really say like what was actually in the content. And so using the object-oriented UX approach, which I highly recommend, we really kind of locked down our content modeling approach and actually started to define what we have on the site. And of course, this helped lead to actually modeling the knowledge graph, because knowing what content we have and what metadata or taxonomy needs that content has actually gives us better information about what needs to be in the knowledge graph. Because it's not just about connecting the right content pieces together, it's about connecting the right concepts together. And so we would get requirements from not only the content model, but any new features that were being spun up by PMs for the site. So if we know like, oh, this feature is shipping, it really would benefit from a development language taxonomy. Cool, let's add that and make sure it's represented in the knowledge graph. User research. We don't get a ton of user research, but when we do have it, it's really useful for trying to figure out the different ways that people are thinking or navigating through our content. And also just domain research, whether that is competitor research, like looking at AWS or Google Cloud and figuring out, how they're describing their products or their users are accessing information, all the way to educational sites like Khan Academy or Coursera, trying to figure out what is the language, what are the concepts, what are the things that people are really kind of looking for when they're accessing information like this or through these types of contexts. And really, I think something that's been just a big game changer for us was really getting something standardized and manageable for our taxonomy and ontology work. I don't think any of the knowledge graph program would be possible without some sort of central platform of truth for that information, which for us has been Pool Party, and it's been great. It's probably one of the few third party products we've been able to integrate into our stack, but it is extremely useful and it integrates well with everything else. And so, kind of the benefit is usually pretty easy for a lot of people to see, especially our engineers. They really like not having to manually enter all of the taxonomy values and instead just being able to call it via an API. And so where we are right now is we have a pretty good handle of structured content on the site. There are more things that we're doing every day and more initiatives to kind of get even better structured content, but we have a really good process and expectation for kind of how things go onto the platform now. We are enhancing our taxonomy and metadata capabilities all the time, which is absolutely essential for building the knowledge graph. Auto tagging, so we no longer have to think about, asking hundreds of authors to manually retag their content. We can just point a machine at it now, pretty much. Not for every taxonomy we have, but we're getting there. And we can also implement relationships between metadata or tags on the content that aren't relegated to the strict kind of broader, narrower related relationships that you have with a traditional taxonomy. We can use a lot more semantic relationships. So we can say this product is developed with this development language, or this product is used in this industry. Those are much more important and useful relationships than kind of the broader, narrower taxonomy relationships that you often get. Our silos are cracking because we have greater ability to actually, point at content across our modalities, and we have better governance. Kind of going along with the auto tagging and metadata capabilities, the ability to bulk tag has just been insanely useful. Like, I can't imagine trying to do any of this without the ability to bulk tag. And that has been really essential in trying to get us to where we need to be for like full-on knowledge graph implementation, at least from an IA standpoint. And so where we're going with this from, again, kind of the information architecture standpoint, is really using that applied ontology to drive the site experience. So making sure our navigation isn't, hard coded. Someone is not manually having to update our navigation. We can actually use our taxonomies, our ontologies to actually make it useful. And recommendations, absolutely need to be able to use the knowledge graph to make the right recommendations for the right context. One thing that I'm really excited about is linked data, not only to external sources like Wikipedia, which I think is actually really important for us, but also internally at Microsoft too. So again, to those, product taxonomies that might exist elsewhere in the organization, mapping to those. HR systems. We have a few needs where it's like, oh, it would be really good to get, this tied up with the information that HR has. And so being able to do that, I think, will be really powerful in making our platform, a lot more extendable and a lot more useful to people across the corporation. We're currently working on increasing our auto tagging capabilities. We pretty reliably auto tag with our product taxonomy right now, but that's a lot of just kind of straightforward text recognition. So like, does the product name appear in a piece of content? Cool, tag it with that product. When we're thinking about something a little bit more subjective, like subject or maybe the job role that might be useful for a piece of content, that's a little bit more involved in terms of training the machine. And so that's somewhere where we're focusing a lot of effort right now. And better management of our metadata. We want to be able to change things easily without disrupting anything on the platform. And this is a big area where we've been spending a lot of our engineering time. And then I wanted to touch really quickly on artificial intelligence and machine learning, because I'm a firm believer that there is no AI without IA, as people have pointed out rightly over the years. For us, as information architects, AI really helps us in the areas of like auto tagging, because we can train a machine to auto tag. We can train that logic in. You have to check it and audit it and make sure things are going well, but it's a lot easier to train a machine than it is to train thousands of authors. Smart auto population of content based on the knowledge graph. We have so many potential landing pages or combined products that we want to be able to have content about. It's really hard to make those pages right now because they have to be manually curated. So that requires someone who knows all of the content, who knows the entire product space. But with a knowledge graph, that's a lot easier to just kind of auto-populate, check it, and then publish. And then personalizations and recommendations. This is really just such a huge area for the knowledge graph for us, because we need to be able to make good recommendations to people based on the context that they're in. And then for everyone else, whether those are internal Microsoft employees that we work with or our end users, a lot of this work is just foundational for anything like ChatGPT or any other AI systems that want to be used on the platform. My colleague Rachel Price has a great article called ChatGPT and Negotiating the Question, which I highly recommend checking out. But a great way to get ChatGPT to stop hallucinating or to stop giving wrong answers is to hook it up to a knowledge graph, because the knowledge graph provides a source of truth. It provides a little bit more context for ChatGPT or whatever copilot you might be using to actually grab information that is correct for the context that you're in. And so a big push for the knowledge graph right now is supporting those AI systems that are being implemented. And so that's kind of all to say that structure is really vital for creative work. So there is absolutely a need for information architects in the development of a knowledge graph. If you are in an organization that is thinking about building a knowledge graph, I think it's a really good area to explore. But you also need to answer some questions like, there's a lot of buzz around this. Do you need to go into it all immediately? Can you take gradual steps? Those gradual steps will still benefit you and your organization because they are foundational. Being able to say what information you have, how it's structured, how it's related, will always be a benefit, even if you don't go all the way to building a knowledge graph and implementing it for content retrieval. And so it is so important to have that structure there for any type of creative technical work. And I will leave it with that.
Thank you. Dana, thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. And thank you, everyone, for joining in today. We have our next webinar next week. Please do join, and good night.